Now, let's quickly head on to Mr. Umana. He is the Managing Director of Oil and Gas Free Zone Authority, and he is a seasoned administrator. He'll be speaking on the topic, an overview of Oil and Gas Free Zone Authority, the last 4 years, a progress report. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I must also express my appreciation to the other participants, Professor Tomi, Reverend Father B, Mr. William, and the honorable member who has just spoken, Honorable Wum. I hope I pronounced the name well. If I did not, please forgive me. I want to say that the conversation has been very interesting, a lot to learn from it. I believe that the conceptual issues about what a free zone is was very effectively handled by Professor Tomi and Reverend Father Obi. But let me also point out that the free zone has been a veritable tool used to drive economic growth and development. And we have many success stories around the world, and even in Africa, Mauritius, Ethiopia. And Nigeria started this journey in 1992 when the Nigeria Export Processing Zones Authority was established. Then the focus on the use of free zones to drive economic growth was on export processing. So that is why even the name was the Nigeria Export Processing Zones Authority. Over time, the free zones evolved, and there was a shift from just export processing for exports. And you'll know that that also aligns with the time when there was the economic strategy of import substitution. So you had to produce and then you set up platforms around the port areas so that you could also produce for exports. But free zones have since shifted from just being mere export processing platforms to becoming platforms for production in industrial parks, in special zones, and in diverse areas. There are countries whose free zones are anchored on agriculture, and they've made a success of it. Some on textiles, and they've made a success of it. So I'm talking about specialized economic zones. Nigeria in its wisdom in 1996 also decided that there was need to have another regulator, the Oil and Gas Free Zones Authority, with a specific mandate to regulate free zones in the oil and gas sector. So there was the strategy of specialization and specificity. Concentrate to see what could be done to drive growth in that area, and by extension, drive growth in the entire economy. The authority started operations in 2000, and I must say that to understand what we really do, I have to talk about our mandates. Our primary mandate is to attract foreign direct investments using the vehicle of the free zone. And by attracting foreign direct investments and getting the companies to set up shops in our zones and produce for exports and also for the domestic market, we also generate employment, create jobs. And when specialized companies come into operate within our zones, there's also transfer of skills and technology. I think Professor Tomi alluded to the need for specialized skills in some areas of the production value chain. Now, how have we fared? Because that is the theory. I believe that to create free zones that can attract foreign direct investments, because the world is global, and those who have money to invest, they can go anywhere. So they have a choice to make. And as Professor Tomi rightly pointed out, you have to be globally competitive to attract foreign direct investments. So I think the starting point is the legal framework, because you provide incentives, and you're hoping that the incentives you are providing will compete favorably with incentives provided in other free zones globally. So based on our law, we have a range of incentives, financial incentives, which cover tax exemptions for companies who operate within the zones. They're exempted from company tax, they're exempted from import duties. Although they are employees within the zones pay as you earn to the states where the zones are located. Now, but financial incentives, in my view, in the global world of today, certainly will not do. You need to do more than financial incentives. And so the emphasis today is also on soft incentives, which has to do with the operations and how have we made life easy for investors who come to operate within the zones beyond the financial incentives. And you know, by its very nature, a free zone is an enclave, specially designated to make sure that life will be made easy for investors. That's what a free zone is all about. So if the rest of the country is all broken down in terms of infrastructure, no power, no roads, and so on and so forth, so you can provide within that enclave facilities which are world standard facilities, so that regardless of what is happening in the rest of the country, companies can produce optimally and efficiently within the free zone. Now, our flagship free zone has been the One free zone. And when I said enclave really means it is like a country within a country. And that is why if you look at the Oil and Gas Free Zones Act, it is stated, one of the clauses in the Act states clearly that some of the laws that operate in the rest of the country, in the customs territory, are suspended in the free zone. And the whole idea is to make sure that laws that will become obstacles, impediments for companies to operate optimally are suspended, and therefore the free zone can run as a one-stop shop. So what we do as the regulator of the zones is to ensure that companies who operate there, they don't have to go outside to look for customs approvals, immigration permits or approvals. Everything is done within the zone as a one-stop shop. When the requests go through the authority, they are treated expeditiously so that the companies can have value. This is what I'm talking about, soft incentives. And when I took over as managing director in 2016, I think the last quarter of 2016, I took what I should call foundational steps, which was, first of all, to decide look at where we were in relation to other free zones around the world. I got a group who did the studies for me, and based on that study, I then had the management retreats, and we came up with a roadmap, deciding on where we would like to go and how we would like to position ourselves in relation to the zones around the world who are doing very well. So we came up with a number of goals, I think 5 goals. The primary goal was to create an enabling environment. Of course, doing that meant that we had to deal with a number of issues. And the first issue that we had to deal with, which was key in my opinion, when the honorable member spoke, he said the problem is not about laws. I also believe that the problem is about laws. The legal framework is key and is critical. If you look at my law, for example, it was a military decree of 1996. And who knows, it could have been done in somebody's bedroom without the input of stakeholders, and then they got the military head of state to sign. So that law has serious issues which has led to conflicts with other agencies, which has led to jurisdictional issues, clarity. You talk about transparency. Means standards. Standards must flow from the law. That is the truth. So when you have a law that lacks clarity, you cannot have transparency. So that's why one of my major issues when after looking at the law and looking at all of the impediments was to try to get the law amended, which was not easy. We got the House of Representatives to amend the law. But we couldn't have the concurrent passage of the bill in the Senate. But we will go back again, because I believe that until that is done, then even the right framework will not be provided. So all that we really had to do. Creating enabling environment also meant looking at our operations. Our operations were manually done as against what was happening in the other free zones around the world. So we took a bold step of ensuring that we will automate all of our processes. We engaged Oracle, and then they provided a software which we are now using. And then, of course, we also had to upgrade our website to make it interactive. Well, these are issues you may say are issues to be taken for granted, but these were issues we had to deal with. We had to recruit the authority so that we could compete globally and set the standards. And I must say, we took these actions even before the federal government came up with the Executive Order 001 on transparency and efficiency. We already took steps in the same direction. Well, not surprisingly, because after all, the idea of that order, if we had done it, doing what really is within our mandate to do. So, so we set timelines. In the past, it was license, and we would not know when we would get the feedback. So we set a timeline and said, we meet all of our requirements in 3 weeks, we issue the license. We will renew your license in 3 days, again, if you meet all of the requirements. And most importantly, on operations, you know, these are things that can be verified. On operations, we told our clients, our stakeholders, that we'll clear cargoes within the free zone in 48 hours. And to do that, we engage customs and the Nigerian Ports Authorities and the other stakeholders. And so we came up with a new standard operating procedure, service level agreements with all of these parties, and we say within 48 hours. From our own side, the authority, any request that comes to us will be dealt with under 24 hours. We have kept to that promise. And then on the side of customs, we also engaged the customs and also had their buy-in so that whatever requests came in would also be dealt with on their side in 24 hours, so maximum of 48 hours. So these initiatives, of course, I believe have paid off, but for other constraints. And it's not surprising that when the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council assess the performance of agencies, in terms of implementation of the Executive Order 001 on efficiency and transparency, we're ranked number 1 out of 44 MDAs. And let me also state that beyond improving the working environment for workers, which is also key, because if you deal with foreign investors, it means you're also projecting the image of Nigeria. Somebody comes into an office that is all broken down, dirty, and so on. It speaks to the image of Nigeria. So we also had to look at the working environment, training for our staff, so that they could become compliant in terms of skills required to operate in today's world. And I have already mentioned the legal framework, mentioned operational efficiency, then issues of values, because I told my workers, look, you have to act as professionals.
All right, Mr.
So that if somebody comes,
yeah, just staying with you. I know that, what you're saying is really key right now, but we wanted to also get a clear view of the progress report on some of the free zones. I know that on your port in River State received Mike's first direct service container ship, the Kaiparisa gearless ship, just a few months ago, which is coming for the first time from the Far East. I think that's a welcome development. But going forward, I'm thinking, how many of the free zones right now are quite functional? I know Ona is one, the Warri oil and gas free zones.
Warri, we had issues, free zones that deal with oil and gas operations. So you must have an anchor. When you had Shell in Warri, so Shell was like an anchor, and therefore you could have other support companies, logistics companies, and so on. When Shell moved away, of course, it affected Warri. So Warri has not been as active. We also have another free zone in Lagos, the Eco Support free zone, which became operational under my tenure. We're working to establish a free zone now in Akwa Ibom, working with NNPC and Akwa Ibom state governments. The documents are before Mr. President now. Before I became MD, the brass free zone was also licensed, but it is not operational because the anchor project, which I think it was a fertilizer project, has not taken up. They still have issues with that. I must also explain that our free zones, the oil and gas free zones, they not only emphasize production, which Professor Tomi spoke about, they also serve as service centers. But in any case, service centers, because when you provide logistics, you're enhancing production. So it is the same thing in terms of the value chain. So we also have logistics companies supporting the operations of the industry. And in terms of success stories, you can point to some very key players, global players like FMC, Tenaris, who have set up shop in our free zones. And they're producing specialized equipment hitherto imported into Nigeria, so which of course will help in observing foreign exchange and so on and so forth. But you see, the people sometimes ask me, if these companies all come in here and they're not paying taxes, therefore there's a loss of revenues to federal governments, yeah, is it worth it? And then, of course, my answer is look around the world and look at how the free zones have been impactful in terms of driving economic growth and development. Because what you lose in terms of tax revenues, you should recoup in terms of the investments attracted, in terms of the transfer of technology and skills, and in terms of the creation of jobs. So that is the way to look at it. But I must say that even though you will say that our free zones are enclaves, cut off, we are not totally immune from what is happening outside our free zones. And that's why you study successful free zones, you find that they're established in very active ports, functional ports. They have functional airports. They have universities who train highly skilled workers and so on and so forth. So these are complementary infrastructure supports required to drive free zones successfully. When I took over, and I remember that even having access to the free zone was a big issue because the road was all broken down. A journey of maybe 40 minutes, 45 minutes would take 3-4 hours. And I said to myself that, oh, this cannot be right, it's a joke. Because you talk to foreign investors and their first experience, even in coming to have an assessment of their free zone, is to sit in the car for 4 hours and then you find trucks falling all over the place. And I took steps at that time to write to other government agencies for intervention. So what am I saying in effect? I'm saying that for us to get our story right, we have to deal with other infrastructure, port infrastructure, airports, rail, roads. I see no reason why the roads leading into our free zones should not be maybe 10 lanes, 15 lanes, so that you can have dedicated lanes for trucks and so on. So that should be the dream, that should be the future.
Okay, just before you go, other stakeholders have also thought that a technical audit of free zones in the country should also be part of the reform going forward, so as to determine their viability and their relevance. Do you think that's a good way of looking at it?
It would be a good way to go, because when I did my own assessment, it was an internal technical audit that I did for my takeoff. So I believe government should go the whole hog and do that kind of technical audits, yes.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Umana. It's been fantastic having you speak to us. Please remember that we're going to take just a few questions from our participants before we go. I can see many questions here. Well, we want to say thank you, Mr. Umana, for that.
Thank you.
And a lot of people are wondering how we're going to cope, especially post the COVID era and the drop in demand by OPEC countries in oil, I think 30%. But I'm sure that with you at that helm of affairs and some of the considerations you've made and the objectives and considerations made from this conversations, there will be definitely a review of some of the activities. And Umana is the Managing Director of Oil and Gas Reason Authority and a seasoned administrator as well. So now I know that there are so many questions and people have been asking questions and also making contributions. And I think one of them is somebody here said, please, said there should be a common resolution and framework by all Niger Delta states in building the free trade zone across the Niger Delta. And then somebody else said there should be a trans-Niger Delta transportation and logistics framework for movement of goods on sea, land, and train, which the NDDC should be mandated as a second phase of intervention to build a world-class rail across all the FTZ zones to be created. And these are some of the contributions. So if we have any more questions, please just send it forward and we can look at it and definitely take it, because we're well ahead of time and have exhausted. If you check your time now, it's about 12 minutes past 4, and I'm sure our speakers are quite tired there. But in the meantime, we want to say thank you to all our speakers. It's been very insightful. I mean, this should be, and I'm sure this is going to be regular and absolutely intended to continue beyond this phase. So I want to say thank you to all our guests, and thank you for all your insightful contributions. It's been quite interesting doing this with you. I hope I have been able to be a wonderful host in the past 3 or 2 hours to you all, to all our participants, and that will be it for today's first series. And we have been looking at repositioning the economy, especially looking at the Oil and Gas Free Trade Zone Authority and a stakeholders' perspective. So thank you to Professor Patrick Tommy. Thank you, I can see you. Thank you for being our guest and our speaker on today's webinar, Honorable Rimande Ishauli Kwawum. Thank you so much. Father Edward Obi, thank you so much for your passion and your contribution, and Mr. Umana, as well as Mr. William Verma, thank you so much for being part of the program. We will definitely be sending you the conversation and some of the brief from this webinar series, and I have been yours truly, Adora Onyechere. Thank you so much.